Got it. Hello, friends. Hello, family. Oh my gosh, this is awesome. I just before I got here, I just got really quiet, and then I just realized that this is just such an enormous privilege to swim around this beautiful, magical book of ours with people who love it. I mean, that is like building the fellowship we crave, right? This is amazing. Thank you. Yeah, we are on Roman numerals, page XI, the preface. Last week I saw that I bounced right over to the forward to the first edition and left this juicy little two-pager out. So let's just let's just pause and go backwards a little bit. We're on the preface, okay. And yeah, let's see. And I'm here with Bill S. He's there in that little Hollywood square with me, and Bill jumps in every now and then. And I think especially with this, his amazing contribution in the last two rounds, but especially now because we're going to look a lot at how this book, how the circulation grew. It's there's some amazing figures here. You might think like the preface, what, how possibly not? And why are you just not just get into the doctor's opinion, man? Let's not talk about real. Hang on. Let's see what's here. Let's start. All right. So this is the fourth edition of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. This is the one I have in my hands. The first edition appeared in April 1939, and in the following 16 years, more than 300,000 copies went into circulation. The second edition, published in 1955, reached a total of more than 1,150,000. 150. Oh my gosh, I sound like I sound like our one of our most recent presidents. I can't get it. The third edition, sorry, which came off press in 1976, achieved a circulation of approximately 19,550,000 in all formats. So let's just stop there. I can see my South African brothers are laughing at me. Just a little bit of background. This is an outside issue, but we have one of our presidents did a public speech, and it took him a good 7 to 8 seconds to try and get his tongue around quite a big number, just like I did. Okay. All right. So there's a couple of really profound things here that when I asked my mom, because I'm not a very good mathematician and I wouldn't even know how to do this sum, but I asked her, I said to her, Mom, what is the growth? If you look at these numbers, what is the growth in 37 years? And she just texted me. She said, that is, let's see what my mom said. She's like one of those Excel spreadsheet budget gurus. She says that equals approximately 1,702% growth per year. That is unbelievable, my child. Are you sure about those figures? I'm like, yep, I'm very sure. I've just taken it from the book, from the black bits on this white page. So that is incredible. And the only two powers behind that, no marketing, no social media, no digital marketing strategy, no PR. Guys, two beautiful powers. One alcoholic telling another alcoholic, and the power of God. I mean, what a business. God Inc., right? I mean, look at that growth. It's incredible. And
Yeah, but Nadia, since you're being recorded. Let's not mislead the fans who weren't there when you were there back in the beginning, counting every alcoholic that got sober over the last 89 years. Thank you for your service. Remember the Jack Alexander publication? One of our baseball great, Raleigh, and I don't remember his last name, Steve will know it. There was some publicity about him. The Cleveland Plain Dealer published a publication. I mean, what she's saying is it was word of mouth, but when she said there was no social media, there was social publication. I mean, when they discovered a cure for this illness that had been plaguing mankind ever since man first crushed grapes, people got a hold of it and did not bastardize it, they used it, but exactly what she said. And the second one was the power of God. Something was operating on our behalf before we were even born to give us a solution to a problem we didn't even have yet.
Thank you. You're very right. That Jack Alexander. So Jack Alexander, a little bit of history about him. And also don't hold me to this. I could be wrong. I just remember hearing this in a couple of meetings that I've been to. He was a journalist who would be called out to sniff out frauds. So if there was some pyramid scheme or some business scheme or some miracle medicine that would cure something, Jack Alexander was called in. And that's what he did. He was called in to come and see what was going on with AA. And yeah, he found some miracles, and he wrote, actually it'll be amazing. I think if I can check with Steve, it might be really cool if we can post that article in our WhatsApp group, and we'll share the link to the WhatsApp group shortly as well.
Yeah, he was a skeptic. He did not believe what they were saying to be true. So if that's the right person, there was another reporter. It may have been Jack Alexander. You're probably right. And I'll say this on the record and on tape. When Nadia said I may be wrong, the only time an alcoholic says they may be wrong is when they're absolutely sure they're right. So I may be wrong. No, but the reality is he came in as a skeptic. He did not believe it. So he was investigating exactly what she said to disprove what was going on. Almost agnostic in the agnostic temperament to disprove this thing. And he was so overwhelmingly convinced he couldn't help but to do an article which set Alcoholics Anonymous ablaze in the 40s, I think it was, maybe 19. I don't know the exact year. Let me stop there. So I could be wrong.
There's a lot of us being wrong tonight. I love it. Another little bit of interesting tidbit here that it cost. Remember printing in those days? Yes, Tim. We're gonna at the end of the session. I'm gonna definitely invite you in, because I knew when I saw you today. I was like, yes, this is gonna be amazing. So it cost $3.70 to print a book. That is a lot of money in the 1930s, right? Remember, they were in the Great Depression. That is a lot of money. And I think I've also mentioned that when the italics are being done, it was a monolith printer. So it cost more to print in italics. So when we do move on in the book, you really got to sit still and sit up straight and peek your ears, because Bill is really trying to tell us something there. I suppose it's like shouting in capitals in a WhatsApp. Because this book has become the basic text for our society and has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery. I've highlighted this. I've put sparkles on this. I've got a tag coming out of this. There exists strong sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. And what they're talking about when they say in it, they're talking about the first 164 pages. It has not been changed. I think there's been two small changes. It was the one where Bill, I can't remember now. I think Tim will help us out at the end of the meeting. I'm very sure. But I know there was two small text changes in the beginning. And I went to go and Google, because remember the last time I said to you that I came in here knowing everything, and it cost me dearly, because I had to smash my old ideas of what the words actually meant. And I went and I Googled the word society. And it says here, any group of men and women gathered together for a common purpose. And if we look at the chapter, There is a Solution, they talk about exactly that, and they highlight exactly that. And this book has become the basic text book, the basic text. And I Googled textbook, because it is something that needs to be studied intensely. And that's what we're all doing here. You can see the pens are going, the highlighters are going, the heads are down. We're studying this book intensely. These are the instructions. This book is a textbook filled with instructions on how to recover. on how to connect to the power. This is just the very, very minimum that we can use. We do build on this later on in the journey, in pages 86, 87, 88. They invite us to go and find more books. Our sponsors normally give us books at that stage. But this is the basic text. There is all the other, and I've had them, and I'm not bashing any other 12-step fellowship, because we're all welcoming and this is what we're doing. But I've tried the others, and I tried mixing and matching. My result was null, because there's no half measures. Yeah, so there exists strong sentiment. In other words, guys, don't fix what isn't broken.
And
Therefore,
isn't it interesting now that because maybe in our country, maybe throughout the world, everyone getting so woke, now they're having they sent out a paper asking group consciences to vote on changes to be made to the literature. I believe they're going to keep the big book intact. But if we're not careful, we will become so woke and so politically correct and appeal to the masses that we could destroy something that's been changing lives for the last almost 90 years. And it has to do, obviously, with identification.
thanks, Bill. Therefore, the first portion of this volume, describing the AA recovery program, the first 164 pages, that's what they're referring to, has been left largely untouched in the course of revisions made for the second, third, and fourth editions. The section called The Doctor's Opinion has been kept intact, just as it was originally written in 1939 by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, our society's great medical benefactor. I went and I scratched around a little bit, and I found something really beautiful on our society's great medical benefactor. There, as noted previously, the book Alcoholics Anonymous, sorry, I'm just reading a little excerpt that I found off silkworth.net, reports that early AA members considered Dr. Silkworth a medical saint. It was never a secret that his personal relationship with Alcoholics Anonymous was both deep and emotional. He was called the little doctor who loved drunks. The little doctor who loved drunks, because he genuinely cared for and experienced communion with alcoholics, and they loved him. An in-depth explanation can be found in Language of the Heart. Dr. William D. Silkworth, called the little doctor who loved drunks, began an indispensable contribution to Alcoholics Anonymous during the early 1930s from his position as medical director of Charles B. Towns Hospital, 293 Central Park West, 89th Street, New York. It was founded in 1901, was well known as a rich man's drying out place, a rehab for the wealthy, and it served a worldwide clientele. American millionaires, European royalty, and oil sheiks from the Middle East walked its halls, side by side, brothers in humiliation, in bathrobes and slippers. Just love that piece. The doctor who loved, the little doctor who loved alcoholics. I love it. I love drunks. Yeah, so there was just a little bit of background on Dr. William Silkworth. He treated, I also went and found out something more about him. He treated more than, and that's where I can imagine that great love and that great bond and that great respect, because he treated more than 40,000 drunks. And we know that in the book, a little later, they talk about the belladonna treatment, they talk about hydrotherapy. There was lithium. I mean, the measures that they went to treat us and to keep us restrained. You can imagine what this man had witnessed in his life. And for him to see living, breathing, sober, happy alcoholics must have been, I mean, I can't even imagine that man's joy that he must have experienced, that doctor. Um, and then he also got to witness, yeah, some really cool news. So really got to see a lot of sadness, and I'm sure a lot of death and incarceration and just hopeless, hopeless, hopeless cases, 40,000 of them. But he also did end up witnessing 4,000 recovered alcoholics. Got to see them. And that was through the halls of the Knickerbocker Hospital. I think, Bill, do you have some background on that?
What was the specific question, my dear?
The Knickerbocker Hospital.
Where Silkworth came from?
He was at Towns Hospital,
Right.
and
Are
then there
you
was
talking about?
the
Well, I want to say one thing because I was
yes.
thinking along a different line before you stumped me with that question. I do not know about Knickerbockers. I read another book, and didn't have the AA symbol on it. It was the history. It was Bill Wilson's first 40 years. And when you said, the doctor who loved drunks, the little doctor who loved drunks, he was working at Towns Hospital, and the way it was described in this book, it was called Bill W. The First 40 Years, and it was someone who had done some tapes of Bill talking to the best of his recollection, how the story of his life, and it described when he stared out into the abyss and with no faith or no hope, he cried out, "If there be a God, let him show himself." Well, it's an amazing story, when you think about that. But what he talked about is, he said the doctor worked in Towns Hospital. He said he would go down the ward where the alcoholics were, and he said he could smell the penitent stench coming off of these people detoxing, and the formaldehyde or paraldehyde, whatever they use, not the one that embalms them, although it might have been embalming fluid. But he said deep in his heart, he knew we didn't want to be that way. He knew that there was something beyond our control, that no one would make a decision to end up there over and over and over again. And his heart went out. And that's when he came up with the concept that he believed we were suffering from something that damned us to go on drinking ourselves to death once we started. And then what we found out from other sources, like I said, if you really want to, if you have if you're an atheist, you're struggling with believing in the master puppeteer, a divine guidance from the universe, the creative intelligence, whatever we call it in our book, dig deep into the history of Alcoholics Anonymous and see we're on 4 or 5 different corners of the world for a precise time, that the information, that the puzzle was being put together and the tapestry was being painted by the master of the universe to send Roland Hazard off to Europe to find out that he had an alcoholic mind, that there was an obsession, there was something in his mind that we couldn't access humanly or medically, psychiatrically, or any other way. It had to be divine. And he tells him to place himself in a spiritual atmosphere. At the time, they called it a religious setting. And he said, "You can only hope." And Roland said to him, "Fine, where do I find it?" And that's what Carl Jung says, "I don't know. You just have to seek and hope." And he found the Oxford group. And Bill was part of the Oxford group. And Bob was part of the Oxford group. And Ebby and Shemp was one. And his father was a judge that was going to commit Ebby to an insane asylum. And they said, "Hey, we think we have something in the way of a solution. Let him come with us to the Oxford group." And all these people met up for a moment that Bill Wilson could have this experience of spirit. And when we get to it in the forward to one of these editions we're going to come to soon, pay attention, because the first must in our big book says that the New York stockbroker must talk to another alcoholic for the New York stockbroker's sobriety. Although it would have been beneficial if anyone else that he helped got sober, he needed to talk to another alcoholic to give what he had been given freely away, or he couldn't keep it. I mean, when you see the majesty behind this, and get that in you as you read the story, and know that now we come to AA. Hell, we're in a big book compendium put on by Steve. There's 40 of them. If you don't like me and Nadia, well, there's something wrong with you. But you can go to the other ones with the real ballers. You know what I mean? But the reality is there was no AA at the corner. There was no AA in the phone booth. There was nowhere to go but to the abyss, to the asylum, or to the penitentiary. They put them away for the criminally insane. And all of a sudden, this great hand comes out of nowhere, right? A flimsy reed, which proves to be the loving and powerful hand of God. And now I get an attitude because I don't like the information you give, or you make a mistake, so I'll go elsewhere. Wow, almost how, what's that word, obtuse we become. That all of a sudden I've got an opinion on something that's changing the world, saving lives, revolutionizing us. And I can go right up the street somewhere else where they don't talk so much about the power of God, or don't get so passionate because we don't want to show our feelings or whatnot. And back then they had nowhere to go, but God gave it to a guy. And when you read the history, sometimes you could almost be jealous of a guy like Bill W. Right? He grew up and he learned things, and he was intelligent. And his grandfather took a great interest in him and spent a lot of time with him. And then he had met a friend who had given him some guidance. And he was being groomed by the creator of the universe to put this thing together. If he gave it to me, I would have never survived. If you left it in my hands, I don't care how many times I was freed, because I was too selfish, too lazy, too undisciplined, and too ignorant. But when you read the story of Bill W., and the things that he went through, and the intelligence and the drive and the passion, you know that God picked the right guy for the assignment. So I don't know if that had anything to do with what you asked, but I just threw it in there.
Love that. I love that, because that is why the preface, the forward to the first edition, the second, it illustrates exactly what you're speaking about, Bill. Those cosmic plots on the big map of how God wove this all together to bring this book to planet Earth for me, for you, for you, for you, for you. This book was written for you. This book was written for us. It saves our lives. And then we get to see how this all happens. I just love that. Thank you. Thank you. The second printing of our first edition added the appendix, Spiritual Experience, which we get asked 4 times later on in the book to read. In the second edition, the appendices on AA tradition, the medical view and religious view of AA, the Lasker Award, and information, these all right at the back, past the personal stories, information on how to contact AA were added, and the appendix on the Alcoholic Foundation was discontinued. I just want to stop there and just the Lasker Award it's an award that is given to the greatest contribution to medical science, or has contributed to public service on behalf of medicine. We got that. We got that. But the chief change was in the section of personal stories, which was expanded to reflect the fellowship's growth. Bill's story, Dr. Bob's nightmare, and one personal history from the first edition was retained intact. 3, so here we get a little bit, just bear with me, okay? I'm going to stop now. 3 were edited and 1 was retitled. New versions of 2 stories were written with new titles. 30 completely new stories were added, and the story section was divided into 3 parts under the same headings that are used now. And that seems a little bit confusing and like pointless, but let's just check here. Let's just actually pick this apart. Let's see why this is important. So if we go over to page 29, personal stories, why did they highlight that? Let's see what it says here. Page 29. Why are those personal stories in the back? Let's see what it says here. The second paragraph. Each individual in the personal stories describes in his own language and from his own point of view the way he established his relationship with God. These gave a fair cross-section of our membership and a clear-cut idea of what has actually happened in their lives. I'm going to stop, and I want to see if Bill can just launch in with me around those personal stories.
Well, A lot of times we spend time almost making. I'm back in Ohio, back up in Cleveland, and a lead here. I heard a guy lead last night. I've heard a couple leads since I've been back here. Now I go to a lot of these still, even though I'm in the heartland of AA. And when people get up and tell their story, they're given a substantial amount of time because, unlike Zoom, we don't limit recovery to an hour. There were some alcoholics that never went into a bar and told the bartender, "Can you cut me off at 11:15? I want to go home and watch the news." There was no stopping. But we come to AA and we limit recovery to an hour, and I get it. But what they do sometimes is they spend a lot of time reliving their story, and maybe that's for the new guy to identify with the progression of alcoholism. But my experience and my observation over time is that sometimes that differentiates us. Because if I haven't gone to prison 6 times and you have, it's a great story when I'm in the audience hearing it about you. But it may have nothing to do with my life. And it certainly doesn't have anything to do with alcoholism. What happened is you got caught a lot breaking the law. You were a stupid criminal. But what it's telling us is each individual in his personal stories tells the way he established a relationship with the power. Me and Nadia were onto something the other day, and I'll share this with you, or maybe I was on with someone else, but I've been getting into some stuff, and I believe I'm getting some revelation, if you will, or disclosures. Many times throughout our book, and I haven't researched it to know how many, but 3 that I can think of for sure, talks about the alcoholic mind. The doctor's opinion talks about it. In the chapter where it talks about, we've heard alcoholics can't do things that they're not supposed to do, or we've heard them that they shouldn't go watch movie pictures with alcohol. In other words, temptation will knock them out of the box. They shouldn't go where alcohol is served. It says nonsense. These things are not true. A person who cannot meet an alcoholic who cannot meet these conditions every day still has an alcoholic mind, and there's something the matter with his spiritual status. And it talks about it in the book, entering into a region through which there is no return through human aid. And I am convinced. I used to say, well, that guy's not an alcoholic. That's not my call. I'm playing God when I do that. And the reason I say that is obviously from a position of judgment. But they seem to be getting away with a lot of stuff that what our book talks about alcoholics of our type can't get away with. And they seem to get away with it unscathed. Now, eventually, over time, like my sponsor in St. Pete would tell me, no one gets away with anything. You violate spiritual principles, there's a price to pay. It may not be swift or immediate, but it'll be over time. He said, look in their eyes, there's no light there. But what I'm saying is, if you have the allergy, one time, it says this never ever occurs in a non-alcoholic. If you've ever experienced the phenomenon of craving, and what that is the thirst that comes after you take a drink, and it increases with each drink. If that happens one time in your life, you meet the medical description of alcoholism. You have the allergy. But not everyone comes in here with the reprobate mind, the spiritual separation, the alcoholic mind. That's my take. I could be wrong about this, and I'm not saying that to be sarcastic. I mean, I could be. But I believe some of us are so spiritually inept that we must have a relationship with the power, or we will drink ourselves to death or go mad in the process. So when it talks about that, and if you remember, it says in the 12 and 12, and we don't really study that here, but it says, when AA started, blah, 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 we dealt and talked with only the most desperate cases. Well, that's all there were back in the 30s because there was no other format. Here, once in a while, alcoholics had vital spiritual experience, but that was the exception, not the rule. So all of a sudden, something happens here. Well, who else? They weren't going to talk about a teetotaler. They weren't going to talk about a guy who had a couple drinks and got a DUI. I don't even know if they had cars back then. If they did, they probably didn't have too many laws about it. But my point being is, now all of a sudden they talk about it specifically in this book, and it explains how I could sit in a meeting and the guy next to me can have 27 years sober and said, I don't drink no matter what. And I say, well, holy shit, I'm in the wrong fellowship because I drink no matter what. See, I'm one that must have a spiritual experience. I must sift through the blockage to find the kingdom within or access the power, or I will drink again whether I want to or not. And here's why it's so frustrating. One of our guys, Chris R., talks about the majority of the fellowship are the alcoholics of the physical description. They have the allergy, and they're the assenting majority. They're the ones with the voice here. So you get some of us that look like, well, he must have drank because he wanted to drink more than he wanted to stay sober. It looks like that. But if that's true, why is it that when he wants to stay sober more than he wants to drink, he drinks anyhow? That's what we're talking about. Powerless doesn't mean less power. It means no, and it precedes the first drink. The first drink is mandatory if I have untreated alcoholism and I'm an alcoholic with that mindset. So that was a big 4-minute dissertation on your question, is people get together and in their personal stories, they ascribe or attach what the process was where they established this relationship with God and then built on it. They made the connection and then they improved on that. And I think that kind of answered what you asked. I hope it did. If not, no big deal, right? It's on tape. I'll listen to it later and then I'll just delete that portion.
And that brings me to my next point, is how spoiled we are today. We have Zoom a minute. We've got WhatsApp groups with shares being posted in throughout the day. You tapes, excuse me. Oh, excuse me. YouTube channels. I mean, we've got this stuff at our fingertips in droves, and it's just, and it's coming. There's more of it. There's more coming. There's more groups coming up with this. We are, yeah, the struggle that these guys had in the beginning compared to how we have it today. My first time when I came into these rooms was into the rooms in 2014. Being picked up by a lady who'd been around for a long time. I didn't have a car, was beat, broken, busted, disgusted, and not to be trusted. And she'd come fetch me and she'd take me to the meeting and she'd tell me, clean up the coffee cups and hang around. And she'd hang around forever. And then eventually we'd go home. And then that wasn't my first time. And that was on my first sobriety date. My second time that I came, well, there was a lot of relapses in between, but the time that I came in and I'd conceded and I knew alcohol was my master, it was COVID. There were no meetings. There were no meetings. And I had a lot of money in the bank. So I was phoning all the rehab centers, thinking it's COVID. It doesn't matter if it's COVID, they're going to want to help me. And they were just like, no, 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 no. And I am so grateful they said no, because I'd been in these rooms through the treatment centers the first time. I'm so grateful. And I phoned someone in the fellowship and I said, oh my God, I'm going to die. I said, because I can't get taken. I had no treatment center wants to take me. They just like locked out. And she said to me, there are millions of people getting clean in these rooms without treatment centers. And I'm not knocking treatment centers. I'm telling you the miracle that was for me. And she said, you get onto these meetings. There's tons of Zoom meetings. I'm sending you a bunch of links now. And we're going to push through this and we can see each other. And I did what she told me to do. I followed the directions. The clear-cut instructions that are in this book. It's a textbook. It tells you. And yeah, we'll get into it. But yeah, thanks, Bill. That's what I wanted to hear. We're just really lucky. All right. In the third, wait, hold on. There's some more. In this very statistical little paragraph that we're busy here. Let's go to page 563, the third paragraph.
Well, you guys are finding your page. You know why it's so easy going along with Nadia? She's had a spiritual awakening, so she only sees the good and misses all the flaws.
I don't know, that might just be one of my defects, Paul. So Steve said right in the beginning when we all got together here, he said that we're not affiliated to any 12-step fellowship. There's no special 12-step language that we use here, we're not allowed to use. And he read about in the book where it says we meet once a week for somebody looking for a spiritual way of life. Let's go look at tradition 3, page 563, the third paragraph, because it's tradition 3. Our membership ought to include all who suffer from alcoholism. Hence, we may refuse none who wish to recover, nor ought AA membership ever depend upon money or conformity. So I'm not going to continue about the rest. But I've done some work previously in the last couple of months with a member that's here with us tonight, and we've spent a lot of time on how Al-Anons were part of this from word go, and they've been separated. It's all been separated. Got their own literature, their own books. Yeah, it wasn't the deal. It was everybody who wanted the spiritual way of life, who suffered from this disease of alcoholism. Another thing is that the reason that they made all these changes, where they chuck out 2 versions here and add another 5, this whole, what they've explained here, how the story section was changed and divided, is as over time, a lot of our social constructs changed. Bill was talking about it earlier, how there's some language that's changing and genders that are, and I'm not going to get into that because I don't want to partake in any controversy. But the reason that these stories were chopped and changed the way they were was to reflect the progression of changes in our society, from men only to including women's stories to including drug addicts. Those stories at the back include everybody because we have no creed, no color, none of that. We're a society of men and women with one peril, one common peril, and one common solution. In the 3rd edition, part 1, Pioneers of AA, was left unchanged. 9 of the stories in part 2, They Stopped in Time, were carried over from the 2nd edition. 8 new stories were added. In part 3, They Nearly Lost All. 8 stories were retained, and 5 new ones were added. This 4th edition includes the 12 concepts, which was written by Bill to make sure that our service entities remained responsive and responsible to the fellowship. Just as a side note, just as a little line out, for world service, and revises the 3 sections of personal stories as follows. 1 new story has been added to part 1, and 2 that originally appeared in part 3 have been repositioned there. 6 stories have been deleted. 6 of the stories in part 2 have been carried over. 11 new ones have been added and 11 taken out. Part 3 now includes 12 new stories. 8 were removed, in addition to the 2 that were transferred to part 1. Again, all of these were to represent the current membership of AA so that we could reach more drunks, so that we could allow for more identification. Another thing that's quite profound for me is that, look, there's a lot of changes in the back of this book to accommodate where we're at as a society, but nothing. It remains untouched, the first 164 pages. I'm glad you drank that water. Bill was referencing to page 46 in We Agnostics. I'll just read it to you quickly. To us, the realm of the spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. And we started this meeting off with, we just got to ask. Those who earnestly seek. Okay, we're in the last paragraph. Thanks for sticking with us. And welcome to anybody who's jumped in a little later. We're at the bottom of Roman numerals, page XII, Preface, page 12. All changes made over the years in the big book, AA's AA members' fond nickname for this volume, or the Bible for Survival, have had the same purpose: to represent the current membership of Alcoholics Anonymous more accurately, and thereby to reach more alcoholics. If you have a drinking problem, we hope that you may pause in reading one of the 42 personal stories and think, yes, that happened to me. Or, more important, yes, I felt like that. Or, most important, yes, I believe this program can work for me too. We change those into questions and we pose them to the newcomer, the prospect that we're taking through this work. You know what I love as well is this amazing, amazing tool, this technique that I've been taught in this program is pause. And yeah, they make reference to it right in the beginning of the book. We hope that you may pause. Where else do we see that? If we go to page 87, the fourth paragraph, it's one of the instructions. As we go through the day, we pause when agitated or doubtful. We hope that you will pause in reading one of these stories and thinking, yes, that happened to me. Yes, I felt like that. Or most importantly, yes, I believe this program can work for me too. That's, yeah, that's us. And then just want to just take you over. We're going to do a little snorkel. Let's just keep going right almost to the end of the book, page 428. While you're getting there, I'll just read it. The second paragraph. I just want to read this to you because we've had a lot of people, and I myself have been one of those people, and you just heard a little bit of the story in these rooms, drinking sand and thinking that it's water. We spoke about being at the jumping off point. We know loneliness like few do. We cannot live with alcohol or without alcohol. This program can work for you too. I'm going to start reading page 428. With this resistance, I plodded along for a few months. Whenever people asked me how I was doing, I would say, fine, just fine, no matter how hard I was crying inside. Then I reached the crossroads. I was sober about 6 months, and I was not getting any better. I contemplated suicide almost every day. My emotions swung between paralyzing despair and murderous rage, often in the space of a single moment. I was not happy, joyous, or free. I was miserable, and I was sick of it. That was me at 18 months in these rooms, not having read a single black letter on a white page in this beautiful magical book. I beg of you to be fearless and thorough. Yes, this program can work for you too. Thanks so much for being with us, Bill. I don't know if you want to jump in here.